All right, there we go. We've got it recorded starting, and I'm going to send out the broadcast for everybody else to remind them to call in. Let's see, Dennis, I see you're online. Great. We'll do introductions here in just a second, but I wanted to welcome everyone again to Part 2 of Building Bridges Toward LGBT Cultural Competency. Today we're going to be taking a look a little more at the business case and the impact of equality in the workplace. And we'll do a little review here in a minute, but as we're getting everybody in and settled, let me go through and have everybody do some introductions. If you could tell me your name, where you work, and kind of why you're taking the class. So, Dennis, why don't we start with you? Dennis, are you there? I hear things moving, but I don't hear you, Dennis. So we'll come back on that. Gene,
yes,
why don't you
I am.
Oh, there you are. Okay, Dennis, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, Dennis Poe
And
here at
Dennis,
Oracle.
okay, great. And how come you're taking the class?
Oh, okay. Dennis Manel, Program Manager in HR Operations.
Excellent. And then how come you're taking the class?
Oh, just to learn further about how I can instruct others.
Excellent.
Just so they can instruct others regarding LGBT here at Oracle.
Excellent. Gene, why don't you go? That's perfect. Gene, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jean Carr. I am principal at Mercer, and I am taking the class because I am the chair of our local LGBTA BRG.
Excellent. Megan?
I'm Megan Gurton. I am from Rockwell Automation, and I'm taking this course so that I can promote the culture of inclusion and engagement within our corporation.
Great. Suzanne?
Hi, I work with the Environmental Protection Agency here in San Francisco. I am the chair of the LGBT resource group here in Region 9, and I'm also the national chair for the LGBT Special Emphasis Program for EPA. So I'm here today to learn what I can and to pass it on to the rest of the agency. Thank you.
Excellent. Sounds good. I've got somebody who called in from 201. Who's that?
This is Shane Nelson. I'm also with
Shane.
EPA. I work with Suzanne, actually, but I'm in the New York office. And I'm the Special Emphasis Program Manager for LGBT for New York.
Excellent. Sounds good. And Darius, it looks like you called in from inside. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, Darius, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the group?
Oh, yes. Hello, my name is Darius. I'm the new Community Relations Manager for Out and Equal.
All right. It looks like we've got just about everybody who was signed in is in. So, again, this will be recorded, so if you miss any of it or have to run out, we'll go to about 11:15 Pacific. We'll send that recording back out for everybody. I want to do a little bit of a review from last time. And let's see. And who just joined us from 610? Somebody just joined us?
Marisha.
Oh, Marisha? Good. Okay. How you doing? All right. Okay, so let me go ahead and do some mute of everybody so we get a good recording on this. And then I'll kind of unmute and mute you as we go through and ask some questions. If you want to answer a question, the hand raise button is at the top of that column on the left-hand side. So you'll hear a mute message here.
The conference has been muted.
All right, great. So let's go back and do a little review from last week. If you've got questions about this as you've thought about it for the week, we talked about 4 basic concepts and terminology last week, and you had gotten the slides and had a chance to take a look at that, as well as the terminology sheet. And we started out with that assigned or birth sex, talking about the doctor saying it's a boy or a girl, and the fact that there's more variety in biology at birth in terms of doctors looking anatomically. The condition is called intersex. That's the term that's being used today. There's a lot of older terms that people are using. A term that is an old term that's not being acceptable anymore is hermaphrodite. That was another old term to use. The other times you see that come up in an individual's life is based on hormones when they go into puberty, or when they're trying to have a baby, you might find some genetic issues there. So a lot more variety. And kind of this whole concept review was about that we all are on one of these charts somewhere. In the Train the Trainer course, what I do is I ask individuals to put a dot where they are in each of these concepts, and you find a lot of variety within the class. So it's not an us and them, it's all of us together. And then we talked about sexual orientation in terms of, lesbian and gay and heterosexual, bisexual, asexual. Asexual is kind of a new group that's up and coming that is talking about having no attraction to anyone else. So that's a new term that you'll hear from time to time. And then we talked about gender identity quite a bit. We've been talking about sexual orientation since about the mid-1990s, so most people feel fairly comfortable talking about that and kind of know someone who's LGB. We find that when I talk to audiences that are not LGBT, that we find a lot more folks are not familiar around gender identity. So it's that sense of being who you are inside. It doesn't require that you go through any physical changes or any kind of medical process to be identified as transgender. It's just that I was told I was a woman at birth, but I feel like a man inside. It's that feeling and sense of who we are. So if you are a woman at birth and you feel like a woman inside, the term that we use on our terminology sheet is cisgender, CIS. And if it's actually a math term. If you think about angles on a square, if the angles are on the same side, they're cis. If they're on opposite sides, they're trans, and that's where some of those terms came from. But what if you're a man, but you feel like a woman inside? And that's where that term transgender comes from. And the same thing for men, born as men, feel like men, cisgender. But if I'm born a woman and I feel like a man inside, then I would be trans with that. I could also be bigender, feeling like both. We talked about two spirits from First Nation. And gender fluid, which means I might feel like both and actually live out both. I go back and forth. I might feel male today, female tomorrow. We're seeing a lot of this as we talk about gender in a larger construct around the country, and we're seeing a lot of Gen Y and millennials coming in not wanting to identify with any of the gender constructs. And then you have the agender. That's really what that kind of defines with that. Then we had gender expression. Again, this was the piece that we talked about was the most important in terms of how we relate in the workplace. I meet somebody, I see them, I think they're male, female, I make judgments about how they dress, do they dress well, all of those are issues that we see. And so we see the kind of feminine and masculine, femme or butch as would be used with a lesbian term. Non-conforming, if I am a man with a long beard and I wear a dress, people look at me and they're not sure where that goes. And all this comes from our own reactions, not necessarily how I look, but how society or my peers react to me. And then you have that androgynous condition where folks are not sure whether it's male or female, and you can't tell, and that makes us uncomfortable. So all of that makes us kind of understand how we walk and interact with each other on those dimensions of diversity. And we'll go back to those dimensions of diversity today. But today's class, given that review, is going to focus much more on the business case. And so I'm going to put up a poll here for you to answer on the first one. And it's just a statement of agreement that the comment is, my company is fully implementing policy benefits and changing workplace climate for LGBT employees. And you've got choices there. It's a opinion poll where you can strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, or not applicable. And so if you pick your answers there, we've got about 12 folks in the class, and I know there's a few more folks that have called in. And when we do the unmute, I'll get you on the line and make sure we get all the names with that. But be sure you hit the submit so you can see your responses. We've got a few more folks. We've got about 2/3 have voted so far. And it looks like right now most people are agreeing. We've got 50% agree. There we go, jumping a few more numbers. 40%, so about 70% are strongly agreeing. We have about 9% that are neutral and 9% that disagree. And hopefully that's some of the areas that we're going to talk about and work with today. Because what we find is that a lot of times we may have the policy and benefits in place. We may have that 100% on the corporate equality index in terms of rating our companies and how we're doing on all those policy and benefits, but it's a different climate. I hear often from individuals who work in companies that yes, we're doing fine, but I'm out in the middle of California in a very conservative area, and I don't feel comfortable being out who I am, and it's not okay in reality for me to be out, or does it feel safe? So that climate piece is a lot of what this Building Bridges course can work on and talk about. So let's get into that business case a little bit and talk about from the perspective of dimensions of diversity. This is the chart we used last week and talked about all those aspects, that the outer circle is about what we know about each other in the workplace. The center circle, the gray one there, is more about how we know each other, our experiences, how we bring our work experience in, and what we do in terms of our communication styles, our experience, language. We might talk about our education. Those all come up. And then kind of the inner circle there is kind of how we feel about ourselves and who we are and how we identify. Some things like age and race and gender, ethnicity, they may be visible when you walk in, but many times when you have conversations about race, you find out that an individual who you might read or interpret as being white, in fact, has a different ethnicity than you expect. So we want to make sure that in all of these areas we remember that we have to keep that open mind about diversity and who people are. The other part that's happened on the business case is that as these groups came into the workplace, we saw that the federal government in the United States began to make laws to protect these groups in the workplace. So the dimensions of diversity, besides being who we are inside and how we experience each other, now became the subject for some legal considerations, and we'll talk about some of those. Back in 1935, the federal government made a law to protect union organizers and affiliation in the workplace because unions were beginning to form. There was a lot of violence that happened. A lot of people lost their jobs. So in 1935, they passed a law that protected unions and being part of that. Not long after that, about 30 years or so, the equal pay for women was mandated as a protection. But if you think about it, wasn't until President Obama's first term in 2008 that he passed the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. So even though the government said women and men should be paid the same in equal pay, it took, again, another 45 years before that law actually went into place. And now, again, you see many people who still have those issues in the workplace where men and women are paid different amounts for the same jobs. And what these laws do on the federal level is they give you recourse. They allow you to be able to go in and to challenge your employer, at the state or the federal level, and solve those issues based on law. So it's an important part of being in the workplace, and it talked about women coming into the workplace and getting equal pay. Many of us were probably entered the workplace after 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, where race, religion, ethnicity, gender were all protected. And the workplace prior to 1964 looked very different. I shared the story last week that when I was in high school, I did not know, or until I got to college, I did not know any people of color. I went to an all-white school. And again, that looked like society and the places that I lived until I got to college. And so that learning experience of different ethnicities and different races, different religions, all of that began to, for me, be learned in college. We see now, if you look at the workplace and you think about your coworkers, you see a lot more of that diversity in place. Much more to do, obviously, but at least they were making progress based on the Civil Rights Act. We saw in 1967 age discrimination was protected on the federal level. Many times, for example, flight attendants, as they got too old, could be fired simply because they didn't look like they were the right age or they looked too old, and so that discrimination came about. In 1981, women were protected coming back from the workplace after being pregnant. Prior to that, they would go off on maternity leave, come back, and their jobs would be gone, and they'd be fired. So again, the federal government stepped in and protected that dimension of diversity. And finally, in 1991, we see disabilities, both mental and physical, were protected with the American with Disabilities Act. So again, many of these laws are also around the globe. We see different countries doing these protections as well. But we see a lot of laws to protect as we begin to work in the workplace and see differences in the dimensions of diversity. But what about sexual orientation and gender identity? This is an area that there are no federal laws. Many people think that LGBT employees are already protected. They are in some states, and we'll talk about that. But in fact, there's not a lot of protections. So I'm going to show a little history piece here again about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. And so you're going to hear a little rustling as I put my headset close to the speaker. But this is a little clip about the Employment Non-Discrimination.
A lot of people in our country aren't aware of the high rates of discrimination